Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. I'm Steve and you are jumping in here at the 5th episode of the 25 Quattro S4 build series. If this is the first one that you're joining me on, check out the icon up there. That's where I'll put the playlist for all the last episodes so you can catch up. But in the meantime, I'm wearing my coveralls because I'm going to be spending the next couple of days underneath the car taking care of some important things. I'm going to be moving around like crazy down there. So starting at the front, I'm going to do a full manual transmission fluid change using Liqui Moly here. Got myself a nice little upgraded drain plug. And then that will allow me to kind of clean up that area by putting in the subframe brace that I was waiting on these torque-to-yield bolts for, so that'll be done and help us kind of move down the exhaust system as well. Then I can do a fuel filter, although there are going to be fueling problems in this car. I'll tell you about that later. And I'm actually already going to go back to the Apikol rear diff mount that I already put in maybe episode 2, 3, and give it an upgrade again. I'll tell you more about that in a second. And then I will do a rear differential fluid change again with Liqui Moly. And then I get into some of the good suspension goodies I've been waiting on. So we've got a brand new 034 Motorsport rear sway bar with all the accoutrements. And then I've got the spherical end links to go along with that as well. And then I can finally put on the entire exhaust system again. And I think that's it for the bottom of the car. So to begin, I'll follow the age-old wisdom of making sure that you can get your fill plug out before you pull out your drain plug and drain out your gear oil, just to make sure that you can actually get some oil back in later. Now, while I get under the car and get that going, just apologies in advance for whatever the footage might look like during this episode. Obviously, it's pretty tight quarters down there, and I'm going to make my best out of it for you. Alrighty, so as you can tell, front of the car is that way. We're actually looking at the back of the engine, and the drain plug is on the bottom, as you'd kind of expect. And what I've got already mounted up here is the fill plug up here. So it's actually facing towards the passenger side, but it's on the driver's side. And I've got a H10 size socket in there. And just because of the tools that I have a long extension that actually goes around the suspension with a breaker bar here, and I'll crack it loose like so. The top plug came out without too much drama, just one big pop. And I've actually just put it back in here, only just a half a thread turn here to make sure that when I break open the drain plug here, it doesn't come shooting out all in one big shot. So let's do this, and I imagine it's going to be just as tough. There we go. I had a bit of mixed feelings as the transmission fluid was coming out because it actually looks pretty darn good, which to me says that maybe it was changed recently, which is awesome, kind of an indication that the past owner was indeed taking care of the car. But at the same time, did I just waste my money changing my fluid now? Whatever, it's okay, may as well do it. FYI, the drain and fill plugs are identical on the transmission for these cars. I am just putting the fill one back in later, of course, but just wanted to mention that because they do not have any crush rings or any sort of O-rings at all on these plugs. You'll notice that towards the head, there's just a bit of a 45-degree taper, and that's what seals it to the transmission case. But going back onto the drain here in a second is, again, an ECS tuning magnetic drain plug. And that's just so I can keep an eye on what might be going on in the center diff / transmission, just in case I damage something in the future. Before I get to the fill, I want to talk about gear oil for a second because it's important, and I don't want to confuse you with what's going on in the rear differential, because the front spec gear oil is GL4, where their rear differential is GL5. Now keep in mind, this is the 6-speed Quattro transmission, and it's actually not just a transmission, it also holds the center differential in it as well. Here are my gear oil selections for the front and rear, and in both cases, of course, I've gone with Liqui Moly. In the front, they're high-performance gear oil in a 75W90, which is the spec that you need. And in the rear, the fully synthetic hypoid gear oil, also in a 75W90, again, what you need. Now, even though this one says fully synthetic, they both are, and they both need to be, but it just doesn't have that on the front label here. So even though in the last clip there I just told you that the front gearbox requires a GL4 spec, you can see that this one is a GL4 Plus. And as the brackets state for you, that just means that it meets the requirements for both a GL4 and GL5. Now, you do have to be super careful because you cannot put a GL5 in your front transmission. A regular GL5 spec oil is going to be a problem probably in two ways. One, there are almost twice as many additives in a 5 over a 4, that makes it able to stand up for higher temperatures and higher pressures. And that's not necessarily something that you need in your front case. However, a GL5 spec liquid can also be extremely corrosive to some of the metals that are found in your transmission. So a 4 Plus is going to be okay. It meets both the requirements. In fact, it probably gives me a little bit room to be extra hard on the car actually, because it can meet some of the higher pressure requirements of a 5, but it's still safe for a 4. Now in the rear, again, I'm sort of in a middle gray area because I told you that it requires a GL5. You can see that this again meets the spec of a 4.5. So theoretically, I could have actually put this in my front transmission as well, but I decided to just try this out and put in this maybe more like true 5 spec into the rear differential. During this fill, I want to see if I can add some verified community information to the coffers here because there's something sort of interesting going on. Now, the fill requirements, and for the record, this is the Getrag 6-speed, the OA3 code, and my subcode for the S4 is the HVM, but it's supposed to take 3.2 liters or 3.5 US quarts. But if you check out the Bentley manual here, and yes, this is for the A4B7, but it has the same transmission codes shared across some of the other cars, just with different gears in them. It actually says a way to test the fill level, because it's not always true that you just fill these things up until liquid is pouring out of the fill hole. In fact, for this particular transmission code here, it says it should be 2 millimeters plus minus 1 millimeter below the fill hole opening. So I'm actually going to very carefully measure out the gear oil here and fill it into the case, and I'm going to do the measurement procedure with a little pin and measure it for you and see if that 3.2 liters actually comes out to 2 millimeters below the fill hole. And this is how. So what I've done is just taken a clear hose here and I've run it down between some stuff and I put it through the fill hole in the transmission, and I made sure it's always uphill the whole way to make sure I get every little drop in there. And I'm just going to fill in an exact volume through a funnel up here, and then I'll go down and test it later. Credit to Liqui Moly though, they have a little extendo spout that comes out of the top, which is really cool. So if you had to go under the car and jam it in the hole and squeeze, you could still totally do that. It's just not going to work for me when I'm doing this very precise test. Well, the test is over already. It overflowed. By how much? Well, that shiny pool's worth of liquid right there. I think about, I don't know, 100 milliliters, maybe less. So I got in 3.1 out of the 3.2 liters of gear oil. And I don't know if that just happened because I didn't fully drain the transmission before. I thought I did a pretty good job, to be honest, and the car is quite level, so it should have all come out, but maybe it didn't. So I can't do the level test now because obviously it's at the fill hole. What I'm going to do is actually wait till I take the car for its first drive in the springtime, and then I'll come back, throw it on the lift, and then check the level then. Maybe with operating temperature in there, maybe it will go down, maybe it'll expand and go up. I'm not really sure. So we'll see where it's at then, and I can actually drain a little bit out of the bottom to bring it back down into that like 2 mil spec. Moving on under the car, so Doug at Apikol, the same people who made this mount and a few other ones I installed back in episode 2 or 3, he saw my video and said, "Steve, cool idea with putting the hardware upside down, but keep in mind the design of the bracket and transmission was never to do that, and make sure that if you're taking a bolt and shoving it all the way up there, that you're not driving the end of the bolt into the bottom of the transmission and cracking it." Now obviously it wasn't leaking, and I've already looked up here with my flashlight and I can tell that there hasn't been contact, but just one time for the record here, what I want to do is take my digital caliper and measure what my total distance is, my safe distance, and then let's just see how much we're actually using. So I will use the extension part of this, put it at my lowest point, send it up, and I've hit the bottom of the transmission. And it looks as though we have 85 millimeters of possible space before we make contact. And based on the hardware, I'm only actually using 78, 79 millimeters. So there's about 6 millimeters of grace on here. So it is safe to do this, and I would recommend that you guys do it too. Due diligence time now that we've wrapped up everything we want to do on the transmission area. And I'm putting in all new fresh stretch bolts on that subframe kind of cross member that holds up the mount itself. You need to have this stuff. Firsthand, I took out the motor mounts on my old A4B7 and I reused these in the front at first. I did end up replacing them, but I overstretched them, put blue Loctite on there, and I thought that'd be good enough. It's not the case. That will not work. Next time I went back to do my street shield install, I noticed how little effort it took to back these out, and it really scared me. So these are going in now. I won't make you watch it, but here we go. Proof it's done. Marked them up to make sure that I'll see if the new ones move ever. And I'll tell you, hitting 81 foot-pounds is one thing when you're laying on your back and you don't have a lot of leverage, but it's that last 90-degree turn to torque it down to final spec that really separates the men from the boys. Speaking of Doug at Apikol, it's time to take one little step backwards to go 2 steps forward and install these red race inserts on the Apikol rear diff mount. So basically when Doug reached out and said, hey, check that bolt length on your transmission, he also said, you know, you really should be running a tougher durometer, the red inserts on your rear diff mount as well. And he sent up a pair, so appreciate you, Doug, thank you very much. And basically for an S4, he said, and I assume this would certainly be true for an RS4 and definitely true across the board if you're tracking your car, this is what you need. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with the blue street mounts. I'm sure for intended use, they stand up just fine and the driving experience is fine. I did see this picture online. I think it was in Audi Zine of someone with an RS4 who tracked their car. And yeah, they disintegrated. It's just too tough a use for that soft of a durometer rubber. So I'm gonna pop out the mount in the back and I'll meet you back here when it's time to press this in because I've got something new for that too. Old mount is out and it was made pretty darn easy by my new acquisition here. This is a full set of metric flex head ratcheting wrenches from Milwaukee. And I've had these for about 2 months now and I'm loving them. I was waiting to invest in a longer term set of wrenches for quite a while now. These were about $400 and something Canadian, so not insignificant, but they have a lifetime guarantee from Milwaukee and they have not disappointed yet. I was waiting a long time to find something with a ratcheting end because that's just really useful and a feature I've been missing, but now I'm surprised how often I use the flex head articulation too. It's not uncommon for me to put it at like 90 degrees like this to kind of get up or down on something and work on it from a totally vertical position. Super handy. And likewise, they have in the open-ended here, you can kind of see like there's grooves in there. They call it max bite, but it really does work super well. Sometimes I'll be on a nut, not straight on, sort of like off to the side just because of the, the range of motion I have, and it does not slip off. These things really do work. Loving them. I'll put a link for a full set of these in standard and metric into the description of this video in the feature tool section. You can check it out on Amazon. And in the meantime, I have another new tool to take care of the fact that I need to press these inserts out and get these ones back in. There it is, my first real piece of shop equipment here in the garage. And this is also what I call independence. It's nice having something like this on hand so I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. I'm not having to find a shop that'll do something really quick for me and charge a weird amount of money or beg and borrow from a friend. I actually have what I need to do, bushings, suspension components, I can do wheel hubs, whatever I want right here. Man, so easy, so quick with the press, and red looks kind of badass in here too, doesn't it? Also, I guess fun fact, if you're buying one of these mounts online and it already has the blue inserts in there, they seem to discolor to sort of a green color on the outside, but it's not the green inserts, so I don't know, just be aware of that if you ever see it out in the marketplace there. And then you probably saw me struggling in the time lapse because I was learning how to use that press for basically the first time, never used it before. And now I really see the value of having like a pressing plate kit and some other items to apply pressure exactly where you want it and to keep your object level or secured in some way. It's cool. It's fun learning something new and I'm so glad I have this tool now. Boom, swapped out, nice and easy. I'm getting pretty good at this for not the right reasons. And while I was here, I took out the fill and drain plug, drained the diff, and now let's go ahead and do a fill on the diff. Ain't nothing scientific going on back here. There is a bit of an axle shield that's usually right here, so I took it off to get access to the fill hole, but this case holds 1.5 liters of gear oil, and there's no sort of below the hole leveling kind of thing going on. It's just until it comes up to the bottom of the hole, that's when it's filled. I guess a hindsight tip for you there, because you just saw me use 3 bottles to get 1.5 bottles worth into the diff. Why? Well, I guess because of how air works in a trap system, especially upwards through a straw. what I found is that I could only squeeze so hard and I could get 2/3 out of every bottle into the diff. So I had to do like 2/3, and grab a third bottle. And in hindsight, I probably should have just used my clear PVC hose just like I did on the transmission and found whatever upward gradient route I could take, like through the axle, maybe like through the wheel spokes or like whatever, and just gravity fed it like I did before. 24 hours later, it's been a long week. I'm a little tired, so I'm gonna treat myself to the world's easiest part one of a rear sway bar install. I'm gonna put on this beefy guy here from 034 Motorsport. And what's actually kind of funny is I've had this sway bar in the stash for a couple of years now. I actually bought it for my Ibis A4 that I recently sold. And it's kind of funny because this car came with this sway bar too. So I actually took the old one off of the S4, gave it to the new owner of the A4, and now I'm taking this one out of my stash and putting it on the car. And when I say it's a beefy boy, it's thick with 2 C's for serious, because this thing is 25.4 millimeters. Now, for perspective, the B6 and B7 platform, a base model would have a 16 millimeter rear sway bar. The S4s have a 20 millimeter. The RS4 guys have a 22. And this is, like I said, 25.4. It's huge. It's going to be super stiff. And speaking of stiffness, this is an adjustable sway bar. And you can tell that's the case because there's multiple mounting hole options for the end links on each side. And instead of me just telling you which one is soft and which one is the stiff setting, let's do a bit of a mental exercise. So consider this as actually a spring where there's resistance on each side, right? Because it's tied to the suspension components of each side of the rear of the car. And let's just say each of us had a hand on this thing. I'm gonna hold this side and you're gonna hold the other side. And I ask you to place your hand somewhere on the other end in order for you to twist my arm as much as you can. Where are you gonna grab it? Are you gonna grab it on this side here in the corner? Or are you gonna grab it out on the edge? You're gonna grab it out on the edge, right? Because you have more leverage that you can apply to the bar and twist me on this side, which means the suspension would have more leverage on that side to move this side, which means the outer hole is the softer setting and the inner hole is the stiffer one. For the record, I'm going to do a proper job of loading up the suspension before I put the final torque down on anything related to the end links, but for the sway bar, just hanging it onto the back of the subframe, you can put the torque down on these brackets because with all the lube inside of the bushing here, the bar is going to be spinning freely anyways, and you're not really clamping anything together. So no big deal there. I'm going to hang it up really easily because my exhaust is down and the car's already up in the air, which is a nice little bonus for me. So we'll get to this, and then I got something really special in store for protecting the end links. Now for the end links, normally in this process, you put them onto the suspension, attach it to the sway bar, easy peasy. But I have something really interesting I'm about to do. I'm going to hot blue the end link components. Now I said hot blue, not glue. If you've never heard of hot bluing before, there's also cold bluing, but it's the process of attaching a layer of carbon essentially to the outside of a piece of steel. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I have to put some sort of protective layer on these end link components because they're raw steel at this point. You'll remember that I brought in these and a whole bunch of other things to get vapor honed and or dry ice blasted at Sublime Surfacing here in Edmonton that recommended that I try out this hot bluing process to finish the coating on these pieces because the other ones you've seen me, squirt a little WD-40 for, they're sort of up out of the way and I'm putting a bit of a oil coating on them, but these are under the car, rain and all that stuff is going to immediately corrode, rust, and bind up these heim joints again, and I can't have that. So he said, why don't you try out hot bluing because it's really cheap. You can use pretty much any oil you have kicking around, and it actually does a pretty good job because otherwise you would need to coat it with something else, right? And we see evidence of that because 034 actually does zinc coat a few of the pieces that they send, like that, and this first piece that I'm going to try out here. So they know it needs protection, but this is what I'm going to give a try. I've never done this before. It's going to be interesting. Now I'm just kind of winging it here. I've read a little bit online, but I don't really know how this is going to go. So I'm starting with some really, really clean components. Now you can only do this on steel, not aluminum. So I'm not going to be touching these pieces right here, but all the other hardware is steel. I took a first pass at it for cleaning just to make sure I have all the media blasting pieces out of threads and whatnot with brake clean. And then I took acetone and wiped everything down really, really clean. So at this point, I'm not going to touch it with my bare hands at all. I'll put gloves on later and start handling it like that. Now, in terms of oil, I think you can use pretty much any oil you want. This happens to be clean motor oil that I've never used before, but it can be used motor oil too. But I think it can also be canola oil. So I think you have pretty much your choice of what you want for quenching oil. And what I did is went out and just bought some mechanics wire. So this is 18 gauge wire. It's pretty flexible, which is perfect because what I've done is just sort of loosely wrapped it around my component here and bent it over a piece of rebar that I obviously have suspended over a couple of jacks. And what I'm gonna do is use my map torch here, and I'm just gonna heat it up until it is like not glowing red, not like super, super hot, but just starting to get sort of like that purplish, maybe like yellowy, getting towards red hot. And then I'm gonna dunk it basically. So I'm not gonna measure the temperature with a thermometer like a gun or anything like that. I'm just gonna feel my way through it, and we'll see what the results are. All right, this first one I'm gonna do with you guys live essentially, and we'll just see how she goes. So start this up. I have no idea how long this really needs to be heated for. This is all a learning process. I have no idea if holding a torch above a can of oil is smart, but here I am. And this is hollow, this piece, so I expect it'll get warm pretty fast. I also have no idea how close you're supposed to hold a torch to anything. I'm gonna move this. I'm getting mixed feelings about that. I can see the head of the bolt or the sleeve turning blue. And now the bottom is turning kind of white. I wonder if that's a sign of it not being clean, or there's some, you know, contaminants on it. Whoa! Science experiment. I know you're not going to be able to see this super well, but I feel like this kind of worked. So I can see a bit of the bluish sheen that you're supposed to get when you do this process. And clearly it's discolored up and down, sort of like the cylinder here, I'm just going to call it. I don't know what that is an effect of. I don't know if I underheated this, overheated it, but it kind of looks like it worked. What I'm gonna do is actually just move on to a bolt because it's solid steel. And I'm gonna see if I can kind of hone my skills of heating it and see if I can see like the color temperature of the steel as it warms up. Maybe I'll get a better bearing on how to do this. I can feel it, it's radiating a ton of heat. Yeah, come on, let's go, let's go. And, hotter than last time, 100%. And here's the result of that one. Now I know it's not great on the GoPro, what you can see here, but it is blue. It is definitely discolored in some weird ways that I didn't expect. And maybe in hindsight, it's really dumb to be doing this on used hardware. Could have easily just gone out and bought fresh hardware and done this, you know, from scratch, but I don't know. I think it's working. Okay, let's get really bold on this one and do a big piece. Should be really easy to see this one turn color too. It's kind of cool how it turns blue first. I should stop right now, it looks awesome. Inside of the hole where I'm pointing at right now is turning yellow again. Yeah, she's cooking. This is probably the hottest I've gotten a piece yet. I think this one was actually successful. So you can see that it's turned like a dark, basically black. I'm pretty sure that's what you want to see. That looks really good. It's tomorrow now, and I learned a lot doing those first 3 tests. So I'm going to change a couple of things. One is I need more heat. I noticed on that third piece that I did, the thicker one, I had it almost glowing red before I quenched it, and it seems to have taken the coating really well. So I'm actually preheating all of the rest of the components in the oven right now, especially because the end links are super thick steel. And truthfully, I'm using a lot of torch fuel right now, and I don't want to go buy more bottles. So I'm going to sink tons of energy into there. And I've got a bit of a new rig that I'll show you in a second with a better view today on a different camera for you. And what I'm going to do is just heat them up tons and tons and then quench them. And I'm going to leave them in longer too. I think I was pulling them out of the quenching oil a little bit soon. So I'll show you my setup here in a second. Real quick, I want to show you the gold standard from yesterday. So here we have the third item, and it's black. It doesn't have that telltale bluish hue, so I don't think I did it perfectly, but it started yesterday as very much a silver piece of steel, so it did work to some degree. We'll see if we can do better now. Okay, we've got a warm end link here, and let's see how much effort it takes to turn this into a hot end link. Perfect. Kind of like blue hot right now, and I don't know if I honestly can put enough heat into it with the torch to get it warm enough. It just might be too large of an object, but let's just see how it takes it. It looks a lot like the very first piece that I did, where you can see that there are some areas that it's turning black, and to some degree, it's taken on the coloring, but I don't think I can get it hot enough. I'm just gonna go ahead and time warp my way through the rest of the bluing process here, and I'll show you the full results at the end, but my thoughts are now that temperature management is absolutely key. And if you have a torch like I do, it's really easy to get small parts up to temperature for a proper quench, but for anything that's like maybe 1/2 inch thick, 3/4 of an inch on the end link, you need a lot of energy to get that thing glowing. And yeah, I guess I could have just kept at it with the torch for another 10, 15 minutes, but I think we're starting to see the limitations of like a true amateur level DIY kit like I set up here. And you probably need something a little bit more formidable to properly prep and then quench a bigger part. I'm all done now, and the results are meh. Some of these on the bottom left, they turned out pretty nice. Like, they picked up a nice black layer quite consistently across the entire item. And, I'd give that like a 6 or 7 out of 10. That's not bad. Other ones, though, like the end links themselves, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think my temperature control was there whatsoever. And God knows my process was ill-informed, probably. But it was really interesting to try this, and ultimately I did achieve a protective layer to some degree on everything, so it's better than nothing. I am going to blast all of these with fluid film when I'm done after the install anyways, just to protect everything even a little bit more, but certainly a cool process to learn and try out. Bluing results be damned on these end links. One side effect is the buttery smooth rotation of these spherical joints in the end here. I guarantee you, if you took anything like this that you have in your suspension out of your car right now, you could not rotate that joint with your thumb. This is awesome. So I'm going to put some anti-seize in these joints anyways, and I'm going to prep these for install. These are already shortened down to OEM size, so I'm just going to get this ready to throw in the car. And proof that they are in fact in. You probably can't see it very well, but I have decided to run these on the soft setting because this bar is super thick, right? It's thicker than stock. These end links are less forgiving than the stock ones too, so even soft on this sway bar is going to be way firmer than stock, and I don't really feel like having the car try to kill me when I take a hard corner when it's raining or something, so soft it is. Now comes the time to put the final torque values on all the hardware for the end links, and you're supposed to do this with a loaded suspension, so I'm going to go ahead and just use the quick jack and drop the car down and roll it around a little bit. As you can tell from the last scene, I still don't have my mufflers in or the rest of the exhaust, so I can actually stick my head in there, and I have room, luckily, to do that even though my car is lowered. But you could actually drop the car onto ramps or whatever is going to compress the suspension in order to let you do that final torque. If you haven't watched my review of the 5000 SLX here, it's actually pretty cool. So I'll just show you, generally speaking, how this works when you're lowering the car. So all I did right now is raise it to its highest point because you actually have to flip both arms on either side to make sure they can get over sort of like the safety stop. And it only takes a second to do that on either side, just like this. And now that it can hop over the rail, grab your pendant, as they call it, and then you can go down when you're holding it the right way. There's an automatic pressure release on the tank, which is cool. That's all there is to it. So now that the rear sway bar and the end links are fully torqued down, I promise, we get to have some satisfaction here because I haven't revisited the project board in a bit here, and I want to mark some things done. We've been busy this episode, so the diff oil was changed, trans oil was changed. We obviously got the sway bar and end links in. We also tried a new hot bluing process, and I swapped out that Apikol bushing set in the rear diff mount. Now technically there's only two things left to do in this episode. I wanted to change the fuel filter and then I'm going to rehang the exhaust. Now I really screwed myself, and to change the fuel filter, normally you would just pop it out, pop a new one back in. But I've done the very dumb thing because I didn't think this project was going to take so long, and I left about a quarter tank of fuel in the car and I did not put stabilizer in it. And it's been about 6 months, so it's bad. It just is. And I know pretty soon here I'm going to want to prime the oiling system, get the coolant filled up, do all my fluids, and then get the engine ready for its first turnover. And I know if I have bad fuel in there, it's going to complicate matters a lot. And I don't want that fuel in the system at all. So I need to get it out. Now, I have an idea to make that really easy, but if this goes wrong, this could just be a huge nightmare. So I'll show you what I'm about to do. Just as some quick validation for why I'm doing this, gas in Canada, when you get it at Shell Canada anyways, where I do for 91 octane, it's clear, and you can see plain as day that this is yellow. It's not like, brown, it's not fully rotten fuel, but it's bad enough that I feel like this is worthwhile. In theory, the process here is pretty simple, and we're using the fuel pump to do the work. Now, all I've done is disconnected the fuel rail. Everything else in the system is still intact. I didn't take out the fuel filter. I just removed the 17 millimeter kind of hex collar right here from the fuel rail. And you can see I've just got a piece of 3/4 inch PVC hose, and it's running into a jerry can. And the idea here is that I have the battery fully charged so it can run the fuel pump easily for a couple minutes if that's what it takes. And I'm just going to turn the key into like the second click for power on, and that should initiate the fuel pump to prime the system. But of course, since one end is open, it'll never be able to hit the pressure capacity in the system, and it'll just keep priming, and I'll use that pre-start prime function to just hopefully pump the entire tank dry. Not so much. It didn't work, and I don't know why. You may have seen a little bit of fuel get sent out of that front hose there, but didn't get pumped out, it just didn't work. My second attempt was to actually just pull up the fuel filter, which I already have, and of course I broke a clip doing that. There's two different types of connectors on the fuel filters. One where you actually just depress one little like side clip and it just pops off, but the other one you actually have to depress, which is like, normal VAG. But then you have to like take two tabs on each side and like pull them back a little bit to open up the fitting and get over the barb that's on the fuel filter. I snapped off one of the plastic pieces entirely. Thankfully, it's just a short fuel hose run, and I might just replace it. But anyways, that was out. I tried the priming process again, still didn't work. So I don't know if the car is just confused because there's so many things unplugged or whatever that it's not willing to prime the fuel pump. But like, it's not whining. It's not trying to even build pressure when I put the power on. So whatever. What I resorted to after that was trying to siphon right out of the fuel tank. And what I realized is that these cars have anti-siphoning devices in the filler neck, so that doesn't really work either. And what I eventually resorted to was just pulling out the back bench in the back seat here, and I emptied it directly from the two tanks. So if you didn't know, because of the Quattro system, there's actually like two smaller tanks in these cars, one on each side, and there's a transfer pump over on the other side that actually like moves fuel back and forth tank to tank. but it's essentially the same on both sides. You just take off the protective cap. There's a little ring in here that you can kind of like loosen up, just take it off, and then at that point you can lift the lid on the transfer pump side or the fuel pump side. And at that point I just put a hose in and then hand siphoned it out from there. So I got about 20 some liters out, turned on the car, and the needle was below E. So mission accomplished. It's just, oh my God, that was the long way around the process. Proof that the new fuel filter is in there, and dead center in the shot, the blue clip, you can see where I broke it. The fuel line though is fully seated on top of the barb here, but I'm gonna leave the access panel off the bottom here just to make sure during my first startup that I don't actually have any fuel leaking. I know I said that I might be able to change that fuel line, but I didn't realize that that's the one that runs way over to the other side of the other tank there. So that would be a pain in the ass to fix. I'm gonna leave it, hope for the best, we'll see. Trials and tribulations aside, I did succeed at getting the rotten fuel out of the system. So there might be like a little bit left in the tank, but once I put some fresh gas in there and mix it up, it'll be totally fine. But in terms of getting fresh fuel all the way up to the rail, gravity draining does work out of this hose here. So obviously I detached the rail and just poured it out, but there's no valving, there's no nothing from this edge here all the way back to the filter. So once the filter's off, I actually just took my air compressor and just blasted all of this out, and I could hear all the air rushing through the other side. So I did succeed. Once I have fresh fuel in here for first startup, it'll be pushed all the way to the front, and I'm good here. Last up for this episode, yes, I'm gonna rehang the catback exhaust, and this marks a bit of a moment for me because this is the last time I have to go into the car to do anything serious at all. I'm done down there, barring any major leaks that might happen because of the first startup. I ain't going back under, which is amazing news. Now, to do that, I have some fresh clamps from FCP Euro. These are $9 American. That's almost nothing. So you'll remember that I had to cut the hardware like this part completely off of the old ones because they were rusted. $9 is what gets you a lifetime guarantee while you own the car. How can you go wrong with that? So I'll slide those on with the exhaust system and then just patch on this last bit of a bracket that's under there too, and we're wrapped for this episode. With the exhaust up off the ground, there's so much room for activities now. And I just cleaned up, but truthfully, I don't have a lot of parts left on the table or on the floor because you and I, we've come a long way together in this build series. And I know today's episode might have seemed a little basic because it's fluids, it's mounts, but I encourage you to get under your car and do that stuff. I'm sure those are the things that most of us skip and we regret about later when we do a little bit of power, whether we push for a little or a lot. It's that reliability that we actually need behind us to ensure that we're, good to drive all season. Just as a teaser for next episode, it's big, sits in the middle, moves a lot of air, needed to start the car. Intake manifold, so we're going all in on the intake system, and I'm gonna walk you through some really cool stuff. I'm not gonna tell you everything right now, but custom catch can system using the best stuff on the market. We're gonna be walking through maybe the DIY flapper mod and some more goodies on the way from JHM. And as a reminder, FIA5 is still a code that you can use at jhmotorsports.com for 5% off anything you buy. Supercharge your car, get the oil cooler like I did, maintenance items, anything in between, doesn't matter, 5%, it's all yours, enjoy. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate you watching. I hope you learned something along the way. Also, like the videos, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done that. Hope to see you next time.
Bing bong!